I guess last but not least is myself, Dan Adams. Online handle is Kamikaze. So you can follow me at, well, I have it in reverse on Twitter, but it's Kaze.Kami on Twitter. And we might as well get started. So my presentation here is just do it, right? So anybody that's kind of new to Unreal, maybe you guys are, some of them are pretty familiar, you know where it is, you guys. But anybody else that might be like, worried about how to really get started, I'm here to kind of just tell you, like, you just got to get started. You just got to do it, And if you don't know how to do like programming or 3D art or doing any sort of material shaders, just get started, really. And so a little bit about myself. Who's this dude? Who's this Dan Adams guy? Well, I'm CEO behind Polar Zenith, my own LLC that I started up here in Portland, moved up from California. Originally actually from Canada. Don't hold that against me, please. And I worked 10 years in AAA development, but really close, dear to my heart that I hold is the project MechWarrior Living Legends. It was a total conversion mod for Crisis, so Crying 2. It's not Unreal, don't hit me. But after MechWarrior Living Legends, I worked on several other AAA titles, such as Mass Effect, which was actually in Unreal. It was Unreal 2. And then over to Crisis 2, Rise, worked on Star Citizen, and Star Blood Arena, which was actually I also co-wrote a book with my brother. It's the Crying 3 cookbook, but nobody wants to know about that because this will be all Unreal. My current project that I'm working on is called Solar Warden. Solar Warden is a space shooter, RTS hybrid, and you can feel free to check us out at solarwardengame.com. So, just do it. What exactly does that mean? Well, I mean, it means with discipline, even you can be self-taught. And you can get started with whatever you want to do, right? So, and I mean, use any motivational slurs that you really want. Practice makes perfect, you never know until you try. Is, maybe one day I'll get to like learning some C++ or learning some 3D, or is it going to be day one, right? Or get her done, Larry the Cable Guy, just get it going. In all essence, less chat, more splat. But I mean, I don't care what gets you going, just do it. And I've heard a lot of people when I've talked to hyper specialized people like programmers or 3D artists, they say like, but I don't know how to code or program or make 3D art or create blueprints or create material shaders, blah, 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 blah. I was never taught this by my college professor. I went to a specialized game college in order for me to learn XYZ, specific design. I don't know how to do coding or whatnot. And you know what I have to say to that? Stop whining! I mean, here, you want to know some famous people who are also like self-taught? You got Mark Zuckerberg. He left Harvard to go make Facebook. I mean, you also have Elon Musk. You guys have all seen, his car that's up now in space. He taught himself computer programming at the age of 12. So, you got Steve Jobs, dropped out of Reed College. Let's get closer to home, right? So in the game development, you have Gabe Newell. He also dropped out of Harvard. Marcus Persson, also known as Notch, who created Minecraft. I mean, he never even finished high school. So it brings me to a quote that I really, really like, and it's, an imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. And I mean, just start. Just start coding. Just start doing your art. Just start doing something that's out of your comfort zone. And, you might be thinking to yourself, how do I get started really with that? And I mean, that is with the power of the internet. So where can I really get started? I mean, Google's big for a reason. And with Unreal, it's no exception. For anything, you probably saw with my background, I did a lot of things within the CryEngine. That's great. Unreal is not that much different from any other kind of game engine out there
versus like even Unreal. So how did I get started with Unreal? Just started going on to Google, learning how to do some blueprints, and you got like links to even C++ or a different blueprint book or engine tutorials or whatever you want to do. And there's tons of other great resources out there. There's even like the Unreal forums that you can go through. Tons of great people that are there. They'll be able to help you out if you have any like specific questions that you wanted to ask about something specific about shaders or whatever you want. And then hell, even YouTube, right? YouTube is a great place. You can just do Unreal tutorials or Unreal something specific, Unreal networking, and there's tons of things that are related to networking. And tons of things for whatever you want to do. This is for me, because like everybody when they first started out, like if you want to first, let's say you don't know how to play guitar. You don't know how to do these things, right? And I could say the same thing for myself, like back when I was doing some stuff for early 3D models, I started with a simple house tutorial, which was just a basic video of how to actually build this 3D model house from Simply Max. Unfortunately, it's all gone now, but there's Lynda, there's other tutorials that are actually better than this stupid house now. And then I applied this knowledge and adapted it to my own creations and worked toward actually building that catapult there, you can see. And what I want to tell you guys today is I really want you guys to take home this mantra with you. Learn, apply, and adapt. You want to learn from a tutorial, you want to apply the knowledge by creating an example, and you want to adapt that example to make your own creations. So to give you an example, especially through Solar Warden, I want to show you guys how I actually took like a ponytail bone chain and actually created my giant space worm mini boss. This one was a YouTube video that I saw online. It was actually showing how to do a dynamic simulated ponytail or a bone chain within Unreal. And then I applied that same basic principle, created a skeletal structure and a fizz mesh for using the same technique and applied it to my worm and profit. I created this, merged this body with the actual worm head and created this mini boss. And that's the end result. So let's look at a real example. We have, what I actually created is a dissolving gradients. Let's see if I can escape out of here. This dissolving gradients that I had is actually something that I actually put up on the Unreal Marketplace. And I'll show you the video here for it. And this was mainly to show off like how I was actually doing like this dissolve effect for some of the damage shaders that I was doing within Solar Warden. But a lot of people were probably, I thought to myself, since there was actually a lot of online tutorials that were doing some of the things to this, I figured I could do something with this as well, but then add on to it. It's too bad this viewer doesn't actually allow you to skip to the specific slide. I'll tab from now on. Sorry about that, guys. And so how I got started with this was I needed a dissolve shader to use for my ship damage. I needed to also have an underside texture for the ship showing the actual structure of it, and expose this dissolve amount through the variables. That way I can actually edit them through the actual blueprints. and then make it easy to set up with the ship PBR materials as well. So this is not really knowing a lot about how to actually set up the shaders themselves, but I wanted to get out of my comfort zone and kind of jump into building this kind of dissolve shader. So like I was saying before, there's tons of tutorials online, maybe from different areas that you might find. Like this one was actually from Shader Forge. So this one was actually easy to interpret with, since a lot of this is all visual scripting and you have the same visual scripting stuff within Unreal to create your materials. And so I applied that same knowledge and mimicked a lot of the same math that was actually done in Shader Forge and built that in Unreal. And from there, I actually learned like some easy setups of like how to actually append a lot of these material vectors and actually do some dot product behavior through that and understood like how those processes worked and then moved forward with it and created that within within Unreal. However, there was a few things that I wasn't really happy about. I didn't want to be restricted by, in Shader Forge, it was actually using specific texture gradient ramps. Those actually cause, you know, like some pixelation with it. And same thing with the texture noise as well. So you can see like, ew, this is all very like gross and pixelated. I wanted something that was a lot cleaner. So in that way, especially from a third person perspective with the ship, you'd be able to actually see like highly detailed damage on your ship. And so I wanted something, I understood that, you know, with textures, especially doing that all with like console development, you might be worried about everything that's memory heavy, but with higher CPU, you can get away with, or even GPU, you can actually get away with graphically processing more of the computational noise rather than relying on a texture. And then I also needed an underside texture, so I needed to actually create that. So to actually get started on this, what I wanted to get away from first was the texture itself for the gradients. So if you guys have like played around maybe with Photoshop, you know that there's actually like some keyframes. I can actually go back to it and point it out. In Photoshop or whatever, you can actually create gradients that actually have these kind of keyframes or key values of colors. And then that way they get locked into whatever bit color count, so like 256 or like 16-bit or 32-bit, depending on what you're going for. But in Unreal, you can actually use like whatever the computational value it is, and that way you have like a perfect smooth transition so you don't rely on the pixel count on the gradients. So with that, I had different values that I actually put in and then lerped those values on top of it. And then I kind of went crazy with additional lerps that I wanted to, in case I wanted to increase or decrease the amount of different keyframes that I wanted between the lerps. On top of that, I also added in the computational noise rather than the texture one, but I had the Boolean switch in here. So in that way you could actually decide to use a texture noise or not, depending on how you wanted to actually have this set up for your individual project. For me, for Solar Warden, we actually went with the computational value and then locked it as well to the bounding box of the specific skinned asset. And then we also set up two different textures. So we had one for the top value, and then that was actually eroding down to the bottom one. So at the top value of 0, and then a full dissolve down to 1. You'd actually see like the face of Zardos here. And here was the end result. After plugging all that stuff into the material shaders, we'll actually go into like specific detail of all the individual nodes if we wanted to, based on the Q&A at the end of the presentation. And I can show you guys some of the specifics of how I built that. And then after I was done all that in a demo project, I adapted this over to Solar Warden and actually applied this directly onto the ship. And I used from blueprints the timeline value to actually update per tick to actually have like a flash effect when you're actually taking damage. Unfortunately, the animated GIF is slow in this one. But as soon as the aliens actually shoot me in this shot right here, you can actually see a quick flash on the ship, and then it actually fades down on the timeline to actually come back. So in that way, it's like this hot plasma that actually hits the ship and causes all this sporadic damage on the vessel. And it's up on the marketplace, so you can go look up dissolving gradients on the Unreal Marketplace. And it's usually, I have it set up for sale every quarterly for like the summer. Next one will probably be the summer one. And we can actually take a look at this in the engine. So we have a project here. Hopefully I can do. If you don't mind holding the mic. There we are. So with this, oh, all right, pull it away a bit. So this is what you would actually get with the project itself. I had a whole bunch of different materials that are kind of pre-set up where it was like maybe ideas for like different things that you would have related to ice. These are all generated from the master material template that I showed you guys beforehand. And those have breakdowns for all their different amounts that you can actually play with here. Let's take a look at one of the animated ones that I've already preset. So maybe you would have like something for like a snow, maybe like a spell effect for snow. We'll grab this guy. And you can see here, you can actually like quickly, easily modify these values. And since these are all exposed on the material parameters, you can actually play with them on the actual timelines themselves, or do whatever you want. So you have like the tightness of the actual gradient that's actually applied to it. Or you can change it so that it's not actually vertical, and you can have like the whole thing kind of dissolve at the same time. Anything that you kind of want with this, right? And so I had a whole bunch of different other examples. We had one for water that I did with another basic noise cloud. And then this one was showing off the different ship hulls on like the under ones from the vertical. And then this one was kind of a bonus one to show like maybe like some acid dissolving or whatever you want. And then these ones were showing it without the under texture, very similar to the Shader Forge one with an animated. And then I also did another kind of bonus texture, was one that I had a lot of fun with, which was a bubble actually. So you could have like bubbles that were actually exploding or changing as you wanted. And then as well as some lava ones. And then the last one was kind of doing like my interpretation of a sun using the same material setup. Cool. Thanks. Another example that I was doing for looking at integrating this into Solar Warden was this laser burn effect. Now this one I had a lot of fun with, because you can do any sort of painting that you want. Even with this, I was tempted to actually do like VR integration with this. That would actually be really fun. And here we'll tab over to the video. So they're just showing like a basic beam that actually is applying like decals onto the ground. But the main bit is showing the actual beam hitting the texture surface and then applying a alpha onto that texture and then blending in my dissolve bits on that particular alpha using the render targets. And so the end result that I was actually going for with this is locational damages on the ship. So in that way you can actually shoot at specific parts of the ship with like a laser beam or rifles, and then have that accumulate the damage in those locations. So I can completely like tear apart this ship, or at least the material of it, from what I'm shooting here. And you guys probably noticed in that demo there that the seam transitions between that, like, of course, it's all a matter of you setting up your art assets to have that work. We'll close that down. Have those art assets actually be set up in a pelt map setup, so in that way you actually have something that's the UV can actually follow when you're actually doing that. That laser beam. So how I got started with that is since I already had the dissolving gradients already done, I was inspired by games that actually did like locational damages, and you could see this in very old games like MechWarrior 3, which actually had specific spots that you were actually like shooting at, and you can actually see like an undertexture underneath that was actually exposing like the innards of that. And so when I found out from actually Unreal 4.13 that they were actually adding in two new main things to both the material and also the blueprints, the find UV collision and then also blueprint drawing to render targets, it got me really excited, and we'll get to that. Where from find collision UVs, we can actually have like a ray trace on a specific asset, so that way you can actually find where the XY coordinate of that UV actually is. So in that way you can get like a hit trace result and have that come back to the blueprint and tell you this is exactly where on your UVs your ray trace is actually occurring. And you need to have your specific asset actually have it so that it's not based on simple collision but complex collision in order for you to actually have that return properly. Otherwise you're going to be pinging back your physical asset rather than your render asset. So with this as well, there was also a demonstration. It was actually more for water, but it was a demonstration by the guys at Epic that were showing off how to actually do the blueprint drawing to render targets. So this was actually showing from the camera, whatever you're actually looking at, you can actually apply like a brush to this particular thing so you can have it actually accumulate an alpha at that location. So in this one, he was actually using the alpha to define like a new height map, but since I already have an alpha texture that I was actually doing for the dissolve gradients, I was like, I could apply this actually to my damage shader. Oh my goodness. And that's what I did, is I applied that knowledge and made a proof of concept with this. So I was taking the same kind of behavior that he was doing before. I was actually painting out with a brush, and this GIF is obviously slow. And then wherever I was looking at, I was actually just applying more and more value to specific locations on that UV, putting that over to a render target, grabbing that render target, and then translating that back to my, my gradient shader. And then adapted that. I used that into a first-person template with lasers. And then there's the end result. You guys saw it in that video where I actually applied that onto the laser, and then, you know, it's actually coming soon to Solar Warden. I haven't actually set that up on all the different ship assets because there's a lot of different behaviors that are already applied to that. But that will be integrated soon. So we can look at that in Engine. Just give me a second here. And so also with the laser burn effect, I wanted to actually include within Solar Warden not just lasers, but additional things like ballistic projectiles that are also going to be adding in different layers on top of that. But be careful with using render targets. Sorry, Jessica, can I borrow you again? So this one, all in real time, you can see when I'm actually shooting and zapping this thing, it's the exact same thing that was in the video. But you can see here, like I was describing, depending on your UVs, you're going to want to have these specific seams that are actually overlapping on each other. Otherwise, you're going to develop specific breaks in those locations as well. But yeah, you can do this. You can see like the cube is actually all just one UV map. But you can set up your cubed UVs so that way they're actually kind of overlapping, but then you'll have to do a little bit of math if you wanted to actually have seams that don't connect anywhere else. And then you can connect those afterward, depending on your brush size. But yeah, that is the basic idea behind that. So the, as well, if I can open up the blueprint. You guys probably noticed it, but also the FOV, in order to really help sell the effect, you actually transition the player more into a fisheye in order to really help sell the effect that you're actually being pulled into it. So all these things is kind of like a Rube Goldberg machine all working at the same time in order to sell the effect of you teleporting the player to a new location. And I applied it to the prototype here that I had set up. It was one of my first ones that I had going. So it was applying like the same principles of pulling you into that location. That one I had like a more exaggerated FOV where it was pulling you in and then transitioning you back out. This one, oh, I think these were backwards. Unfortunately, I think these were backwards. So the other one was actually the tunneling effect, and then this one was showing how I moved around also the exit point. And then that translated back to whatever render target to a new location. Boom. Easy. And then the end result, and adapted this to my own project, pulled this over to Solar Warden, where I was like, it takes too long to fly to the moon, so let's set up a wormhole to get there. And there you have it. PowerPoint gonna go strange to me. So now, to prove to you guys that, you know, this runs on real time and this was not all pre-baked, I'll open this up in the project that I had set up for it. Any questions while this is loading? Quickly?
How much is the computational expense on the wormhole? You said it was pretty expensive.
If the render target, if you pre-bake like a location and there's like everything that's all static, like a static environment, you can bake it into a texture and then it's just as expensive as the texture is, because then it's just a cube map. But if you have it like a real-time render texture, you can define what's on the render texture to update real-time if you want, so like characters, for example, or whatever. But yeah, it's all dependent on how often you update the render target. So like if you do it per tick, then you're creating a new like 256 texture by 256 texture every tick, every frame, depending how often you want it to actually occur. You can optimize it in multiple different ways, but like I said, if you're doing it real time, then you're updating that texture, creating a new texture, and holding that in GPU over and over and over again, and you're making that demand to create that new texture over and over and over again. So it's all dependent on how you actually want to set that thing up. So if you go like 1024, if you have like this giant thing for some reason, then you might want to dedicate like the majority of your GPU to that particular thing, because it'll probably take up, you know, whatever in order to make that happen.
What about the vertex code? Is that expensive?
No, actually it's not really. It's all it is, because it's the same thing as like a skin mesh when you're actually doing an animation. All it's doing is vert pulling based on the skin bones to those locations. And it's kind of the same thing with the material itself, where it's defining new positional data. So it's all dependent on the amount of vertices that you're actually pulling into that particular asset. So if it's like a quick transition for like a singular asset, it's actually not that bad. So vert pulling on individual assets is actually not that bad on the material.
I also think Fortnite uses that to animate their building effect.
Yeah.
They do more vert pulling, and they have like thousands of objects going at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's really cheap.
One more time, Justin. We probably should have thought about this with the microphone. Next time. So this one, so the specific blueprint that I had set up was for 2 different assets. One was for the physical assets, so you can actually like push any of these physical assets into it. Even the bullets themselves, so you can see like all of these being shot through it. And then I can go through it as well. And I need to bring the box with me. Oh, don't go all the way through. Oh no! Oh, I almost dropped my red box.
You're severely missing out on making it a pink box.
The companion cube? Yeah. I didn't want to step on any copyright. Oh, there we go. I'll go grab my portal gun. Woo! Oh, so, okay. Of course there's bugs. So this was a thing that I noticed when I was specifically setting up for first person. So the idea to sell this effect is you actually want it to pull the camera wherever the player's eyes are. You want to have the camera go into the center point of the singularity. So because the character is 1.8 meters tall or whatever they have it for Unreal, you have to calculate that offset. But then you also have to calculate depending on what angle the player is actually at. So if you're doing a normal planar setup with assuming gravity is always like down on the Z, then okay, you can always assume that the height of the camera is going to be 1.7 meters or whatever. So you want to take that offset into account, and then you actually want to move from first person, move the player down by 1.7 meters relative to the central location of the singularity. And then that way you'll sell the effect a lot better. Otherwise you'll have that issue that you guys just saw right there where maybe I actually jumped, I screwed it up that time, but maybe I'll jump into it and then you have, the pull is too strong, I can't jump into it. And then you'll have issues where you have that offset. But I kind of finagled it where I had a kind of an error range. Of course, it wasn't perfect. So in that way, it actually had like 1.6 meters, but then the pull was so strong, and then it pulled me into that particular location. And then we'll finish it off here by grabbing the actual singularity device here. And then now I can set up wherever. So then in the blueprint, how I had it in terms of the state machine is, first you needed to deploy the actual device and then define an exit for it. And then it created that thing and then activated the rest of the actual logic. Wow. And that's it. Cool. So Solar Warden is going to be kickstarting in April 2018. You can support me on Kickstarter. We'll be launching our campaign. We'll be sending out, make sure to sign up to our newsletter. Thank you so much for coming out and checking out my presentation. And that is it. Are there any questions? We can pass around the mic or we can just do it.
Did you ever investigate using vertex painting for the interview effect?
I did. With vertex painting, it was a little bit tricky because like a lot of artists actually use vertex painting for actually defining what they're doing. So in that way, I actually tried to find a way to actually go around that rather than actually relying on vertex painting. That's a good question.
Got another one. Thinking about paintings.
Yeah.
I might not always take particles
You could do it with so I guess in that regard, you could actually have individual particles that collide into, let's say, a wall. And those individual particles, depending on where they're actually hitting, you could actually find what position that they're actually impacting and then translate that back out to the actual UV coordinates and then do your paint based on that.
You can actually get full hit results from particle collisions.
Yeah, good.
You can define physical assets on the particle itself, and then actually have that phys asset. Yeah.
That
and then have a fizz material. Yeah, you can do it that way. Do a fizz material on the particle, so the particle collision, and then that fizz material, when it collides with a particular asset, have that register in the blueprint, and then it can define it that way. Well, here. Wait, let's look at the laser burn effect. I don't know if we can actually do that live. Maybe we can. But is there any other questions besides that one? Maybe we can do something interactive and try to figure that one out.
For your laser burn effect, you said it's a separate UV coordinate?
You can define, well, in this one, I actually had it on the same UV channel as UV channel 0, but like in Max or Blender, you can define different UV channels and then unwrap it differently there, and then make sure you remember what UV channel that is in order to register whatever that effect is, right? What was that your exact question, or?
I guess I was just wondering how the performance was when you had 3 UV channels, or you were just using
Extra UV channels, like you're defining like a whole new two-dimensional coordinate on an asset, and then you're updating that per frame. So they can get expensive if you have like a bunch of them, of course, but like with anything, if you have like this a number of different unique assets, you're gonna run into the same problem, because it's almost like duplicating the same two-dimensional coordinates on your assets all the time. So it can get expensive, but you know, depending where you're actually using it, it should be fine. Yeah, you can do it. You can do it like just on the. Oh yeah. Well, you can do, like I said, if you wanted to just stick with the texture, then yeah, you can do it that way. But yeah, that's no problem. So that's a question for the particles. Let's go into the content browser. I don't know if I have any particles that are easy to grab. Was there any other questions while we kind of played around with this?
Yeah, for the vertex pulling, I've never actually experimented with any of the vertex pulling, so I'm curious as far as, did you select the location as to where the vertex itself is?
So I'll try to jump back into that slide here. So you can actually define specific, you can see here, there's a collapse location that I've actually defined here, and that's from here in the actual material editor. You're defining like an absolute world position, and then I'm getting the distance between like the absolute world position and then whatever distance to the singularity based on the camera of what I'm doing. So you can actually define what that is like directly here. So you can define it at a specific like XYZ location wherever you wanted it to be. So that's pretty simple. I'll actually look at on Jess, I don't know where we can actually put up like specific notes for like specialized things on maybe the meetup, or even actually probably the Discord would be a good place, like a resource location. So we'll set up like a resource location where you guys can actually look at how these are actually broken down, and then I'll look at how much I'll be able to actually put up there for you guys to actually look at and break apart yourself. So let's look at the particles here, because I think that's some materials. My bad. So we have, actually let's just define like a new particle. Was there any other questions as well? Nope. Oh, go ahead.
For the zone effects in the ships, are you using local or global fields for that you can like modify empty, or like is it just as it moves through space? So like as you move through space and you're dissolving, does that change on the ship, or is that kind of locked to the location?
So I've actually locked it to the location of the actual ship. So like you're talking about like when the ship like takes the plasma effect and then how that breaks apart. So those are actually locked to the specific like either the noise texture that I've defined or the noise computational value that I've actually set up. So the computational one is actually based on screen space from the camera, so you can lock it to the actual bounding box of the mesh that you're actually doing. Because I don't know if you've played with the procedural noise map in the engine. Have you or have you not?
Not in this engine, but.
Okay, okay. Because you can actually lock it to where you wanted it on the actual ship itself. So then what I also did as well to mix it up so that way you're not seeing the same kind of like hole that gets developed on the ship at the same time. I'm actually offsetting it randomly by like 100 by 100 values, so that way you get like a different result every single time that you spawn this particular ship. Makes it easier. So I think there's a physics value that you can actually grab. Where was it? Oh yeah, under collision, active collision. Yeah, so under here, I think there's more. I just recovered from a sickness, so please don't get me sick. That's okay. Oh, collision types. Yeah, so you can actually get like specific different collision types on this particle. I thought there was a way to. Well, that's actually when you have the collision event actually happening, when the particle actually hits it, do you want to define it so that it kills the particle? Do you want it to freeze in place? Do you want it to halt all the collisions or whatever? But I thought there was also a way that you can define physical assets. But this works too, right? So if you guys, do you know how to actually set up like new physics types? No. Okay. Okay, all right. But essentially, like, you can treat this as a specific physical asset, and then when that thing collides with it, then you can actually run the rest of the process to do exactly what I was saying for the actual paint effect. But that's a fun one, actually. That would be an interesting one. Maybe I can actually build that for like next presentation, and I'll show you. that'll be an interesting challenge, actually. Cool. Yeah. It depends how many particles that are hitting. Yeah. Maybe you're defining like a fluid volume or something. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions?
You ever tried putting a lot of wormholes together and see if a wormhole go to another wormhole and then spit out into another wormhole?
Yeah, then I just have like an infinite loop, right? It was, I think in my, it was in one of my
That space for poop out those wormholes you got talking.
There you go. That's this one. Yeah, it was this one. So I had like the chain of 3 that were going around here, and I did exactly that, where I was just riding them throughout the whole setup. So yeah, I could define it so that I had like the exit point here, and then drop into another one, and then exit point to up above. And then,
Like a wormhole going into a wormhole?
no. Well, then that would just be like a issue where the player is trying to be pulled into one of them, right? Are you talking like, you know, merging them too, so like 2 black holes, what happens, right? No, it's not quite physically accurate like that, because it is a lot of smoke and mirrors, but it achieves the effect.
You're just using billboard plates, right, for the whole thing?
Billboard?
Yeah, it's a billboard plane that's housing that, like, that you break affected.
Oh no, it's a cube. It's a cube map.
Ah.
Yeah. So it's an inverse cube map. That's on a sphere that the normals are actually inversed. That's what I was saying, like right at the start. Yeah.
I was actually thinking about the outer effect.
Oh no, the outer effect. Yeah, that's actually a plane. Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah, because I was thinking because then you would be able to pull vertices into it. And that would
Right.
work.
So to help, so you can, yeah. In this video, I actually have also to kind of help try to avoid that, because you can see there's actually clipping of that 2-dimensional plane that is against like the sides here. To kind of try to distract you from that, I have particles that are actually following a vector field. Now, I actually didn't talk about that in my my setup. But the vector field itself actually defined to go into a sphere and then wrap around it as well to give the effect of like, you know, almost the black hole that you've seen in Interstellar. Yeah. So you can see here the particles actually getting trapped on the surface of the sphere, kind of like what you would see on like the surface of a black hole. Yeah, I think in this video as well, I actually don't have this thing updating in real time on the render target. That's why all of a sudden when you get to the exit, you see like a block that wasn't there in the texture. Oh, there it is.
Would you say the render target would be computationally expensive?
Not expensive at all, no.
What, two texture lookups?
Yeah, it is, yeah. So that if you have like a static scene at the other end, it's yeah, all it is just texture lookups.
The swirl effect is probably more computationally expensive than that.
Exactly, yeah. Go for it. Oh, yeah, okay. So we'll kill this guy.
I know, there's that little swirl distortion
Well, all it is just a normal that they are expensive, yeah. Well, because they're taking the RGB value to refract the light in 3 dimensions, right? Yeah. That's why you only have one single texture for distortion.
Those are white hot shader density or
Mhm.
shader complexity?
Mhm.
There's that name for
So where was my last tutorial? Oh yeah. So blueprints are blue. I don't know, violet. I wish these actually like save when you pull them across, right?
Yeah, you just
Yeah.
deploy for your teammates.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the better thing that I would wish that like Epic would do is like if you had a bunch of folders, you can see here, you know, lighting, render, VFX. I wish you could define like the colors here. Why can't you do the same thing there, right? So the render. So was this the render target? So this was the actual custom reflector render target, and then you created. It painted it to the texture cube, and then you can define whatever the texture cube you want. And then these ones, so you have to preset them up, the render targets themselves, and then these get actually like written down, or you can create one on the fly as you go in order to make those. So where was the actual material itself? What do I have that? I can't remember where I had it. Let's just grab it from the.
Is the whirlpool effect included in the dissolving radius?
No, unfortunately not. There's a lot of hacks that I have in the blueprint of it that I'm not willing to release that yet. Let me show you how bad my blueprint was, because I was hacking a few things to make it work. Yeah. There you go. Thank you very much, everyone.